Hello, my name is Vincent Baidu, and I firstly just want to say sorry for the quality of the video. For those who've been watching, they'll know that I'm actually moving house. It's going to be all over the place for the next couple of months as I go in and out of England. But just to get straight into the video, because I have a feeling this is going to take longer than I want it to. But this video is a response to a Guardian article as it related to detoxing. Now in there, the first thing that they state is that detoxing is actually a pseudoscience, which I didn't actually know. So that was interesting, and that's the reason why I read the whole article. So for that, like, genuinely, that was some new information to me. But to put that into perspective, so is chiropractic procedures. That isn't actually considered a mainstream science. So even though they have arguments within the chiropractic community, it's still worth having an open mind about things that are not considered mainstream science. So to get into some of the things that I said specifically, there are two types of detoxes. One is respectable, the medical treatment of people with life-threatening drug addictions. So we're going to get to the bottom of that quote and the rest of what's said there later on in the video. Another thing that is said is if toxins did build up in a way your body couldn't excrete, you'd likely be dead or in need of serious medical intervention. So the question there is, how long is a piece of string? How long does it take for a biological problem to break out into physical or visible signs? 1 day, 1 month? I think you can see where I'm going there. So you can have a problem that is within your body and it not show straight away. So the idea that because you're not dead or in serious need of medical attention does not mean that you're somehow operating in your perfect state and that there aren't things that you can be doing to help yourself. That just seems ridiculous to me, what he's trying to get at there. So another thing that is said is there is no known way, certainly not through detox treatments, to make something that works perfectly well in a healthy body work better. So are you suggesting that people at the moment have perfectly working bodies? I mean, it kind of seems that humans are more prone to diseases in our natural habitat than animals are in their kind of wild equivalents. And whether or not that is true is to suggest that, like, we're in the societies we live in now, that humans' bodies are working perfectly. It just seems that, again, it seems like another ridiculous statement that we're working to our own optimum right now, and that kind of the journey to try and go towards your optimum, there's no point in doing it unless you're nearly dead or in need of medical attention. Again, that may not be what you're going for, but that's kind of how if you break it down just to media, that seems to be what's getting suggested. So as it relates to kind of like cellular biology, there are two things that a cell can do, and they can either grow or they can protect. So they can be working with all of their functions as the DNA narrates to grow, essentially, which, you know, at its ultimate extreme is evolving, or it can protect, which again at its ultimate extreme is evolving in a different direction. So the idea that your body in a state of protection is the only state that it can operate in, and furthermore that state of protection is its ultimate form, is not the case. Do you know, that's just not the case. You know, that's not its case at its fundamentals as being at its prime, and it's not the case as in it's the only option that we can live in. So the next bit of it, they kind of go into some studies, and the studies, a network of scientists assembled by the UK charity Sense About Science contacted the manufacturers of 15 products sold in pharmaceutical and supermarkets that claim to detoxify. When the scientists asked for the evidence behind the claims, not one of the manufacturers could define what they meant by detoxification, let alone the names of toxins. Firstly, I would like to say that there are a lot of things in mainstream supermarkets that need this sort of scrutiny. But that doesn't take away from the fact, I think, that piece of work there is necessary, and I think that there are a lot of people who are capitalizing on this kind of emotional and well, there's some sort of a lack that people have inside of themselves, which they're trying to find through external uses, and there are people who are physically profiting, like financially, off these. So that, I think, was a good piece of study, and that was a nice thing to be able to go and research, to go and see those companies who did actually have products that claimed to do something, but when they were asked, couldn't say either way what it is that they were doing. And then they go on to list some scams which involved some tablets and some pads and stuff that I didn't know about. So again, that was good to be able to see those specific products, and was good to go and research that. Now they start talking about alcohol. So let me just read this. So moderate and occasional drinking, though, might have some protective effects. Population studies, says Collins, have shown that teetotalers and those who drink alcohol excessively have a shorter life expectancy than people who drink moderately and in small amounts. So let me just look, like, they had a link to the study they were talking about, and let me just break down the aspects of that particular study that I find interesting. So firstly, the baseline assessment is of alcohol intake, smoking habits, income, education, and body mass. So there's no assessment on jobs or daily habits. That didn't come into the study at all. What it is that people were actually doing with the majority of their time, that didn't get accounted for. There was no accounting for athletic daily occurrences. What sort of levels of fitness that people were partaking on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. That didn't come into the study at all. And also, there was no health assessment. As far as this study states, as it relates to the link, because I haven't actually made this clear, but when I make these videos, what I'm doing is I'm always analyzing the media as a piece of media. I'm not necessarily giving my opinions on the specific subjects, though I won't shy away from it. If it comes out, if I say something, then I've said it. But I'm analysing the pieces of media. So the link that was on the article, as it relates to this research, where they're trying to say that drinking alcohol is good for you, that piece of research itself did not have health as a baseline of the assessments, and then they're going to go on to talk about mortality rates. So to move forward, the second thing is that the study went on to 10 to 12 years. And to be fair, I think I can live with that. 10 to 12 years is quite a long time, so I'll give them that. The study was done in Copenhagen, Denmark. Now the question is does that really reflect the human race? Does that really reflect the whole world? What am I talking about there? Well, I mean, everybody kind of knows that kind of mythy sort of thing about in England, at times where people needed to purify clean water, they actually made alcohol, and there was a lot of people who were drinking alcohol because that was more accessible than clean water. But then there's, in the Eastern world, and say maybe China, they were converting it into teas, which now some people claim that gives people different predispositions to alcohol. Now, I don't know whether that science is true or not. All I know is that if you've got a study that is only talking about people in Denmark, fair play, they had quite a few people. If I remember, there was like a good sort of 12,000 people in the experiment. So it was as it relates to people in Denmark, it seemed to be a fair study if you don't want to take in health, athletics, or their career, what they were doing with most of their day. But as it relates to the whole world, I don't know if that's the case. I don't really know if you can take that as a complete science. The next thing is that the test itself is only giving the thumbs up to wine. I had conversations with people who brought this up. They didn't tell me that. They didn't tell me that in this article it was saying wine. Why? Because the article didn't actually say wine. The article said alcohol. It had a link to an experiment or a set of research. That research only gave the thumbs up to wine, but then it's presented as if it's all alcohol. And the other thing is that in terms of the benefits were only as it related to heart and brain problems. So, okay, heart and brain, cardiovascular, cerebrovascular, that is, they're major parts of the human anatomy. but at the same time, as it relates to mortality, they're not the only thing. And what I'm kind of thinking of specifically is cancers. And the reason why I'm thinking about cancers is because a lot of these detox kind of therapies and things that people want to buy, for better or for worse, for real or for fake, they're actually quite a lot of the time to do with cancers. So if you're going to put a piece of research as it relates to, you know, alcohol being beneficial to you, but it has nothing to do with cancers, but you want to put it into the same conversation as detoxing, now we're kind of into this blurred lines of media subliminals, and you're just trying to put in different agendas. That's where you end up kind of crossing that line. And also the fact that it doesn't actually have anything to do with the liver either. So there's nothing specifically about this study as it relates to liver problems or liver health. And again, if you're going to put a piece of research and claim that alcohol is good for you to a level, then I'm going to want to see something as it relates to the liver specifically, because we all know that that's one of the major kind of components in digesting the alcohol. So again, you've put that piece of research in there, but how valid is that piece of research when it's actually analyzed from an intellectual point of view, not from the point of view of, I want to go and drink alcohol, so let me go and just validate this couple of sentences that I've seen that can justify the next time I go to the pub. That might be a fictional story, but then sometimes how these media articles and media images and basically media packets go out, they go out specifically designed to almost like infiltrate your banter, if that makes any sense. You know, they're designed to have certain elements that you will talk about, but then you subliminally justify the whole article because there's that one little bit that for you kind of makes you feel a little bit better about yourself. So to move on, we all know that a little bit of alcohol seems helpful, she says. Maybe because it's a sedative, its sedative effects relaxes you slightly, or because it keeps the liver primed with these detoxifying enzymes to help deal with other toxins you've consumed. That's why the government guidelines don't say don't drink, they say okay, drink, but only modestly. So these detoxifying enzymes that you're talking about, I would like to see some research into that. Just like you linked to this other piece of research, I don't know why this article doesn't have a link to what it is that she's talking about. Because right now, that's a fictional story as it relates to this piece of media. That may be true or not true, but this article doesn't have a link to it. So that basically just counts as a random theory, which still leaves me in this article with no... It's decided to bring up alcohol, and yet it has no research directly scientifically as it relates to the liver. The government, that's why the government guidelines like blah blah blah. So is this the same government that you're talking about that is legalized cigarettes? I mean, come on, just stop that there. That we don't need to go there. Maybe it's a sedative. Its sedative effect relaxes you slightly. And I think that that's interesting because this is the only part of the article that actually relates to the mental state. Indefinitely. It's the only part that talks about the mental state. So I just think that that's interesting, that the only time that they've talked about any sort of cognitive input as it relates to stress and the relax of the physical body as it relates to digestion or, intake or output of energy. The only time they mention it is under the cloak of the massive corporation that is the alcohol industry. Now, I don't hate alcohol. And what I mean by that is, I'm on a personal journey to try and drink as less and less as I can until I'm not drinking anymore at all. But alcohol can actually be created organically. And the fact that it can be created organically makes me think that there is a purpose for it, that there is a place for it. But I mean, basically, let's go back to what was said beforehand. And what was it exactly? It was said that, the two types of detox. One is respectable, the medical treatment of people with life-threatening drug addictions. So as it relates to life-threatening drug addictions, as far as I'm aware, the only drug that if you try and go cold turkey when you're addicted to it, that can end up with you dying, is alcohol. So that is through a process of delirium tremens. So if there's only, okay, let's say it's not the only one, but if one of the drugs that if you get too addicted to it, you are gonna have to tween yourself off. You can't even just quit it in a day, because that will actually kill you. Why is alcohol being brought up in a positive light in a conversation about detoxing? Because as I've already stated, there are some people trying to pull some fast scams. So why bring alcohol into it in that sense if your point is to try and identify and let people know about these people doing certain scams? I don't really know why you've gone with that. Why that's the angle. And there is, I don't know, I've got a little theory about how this, I've got a little theory as it relates to alcohol, and it's not to say that I think it's true, but it's just something that I want to put out there just for food for thought. So have a quick look at this. So cells change based on the information which they're given, and one of the ways that this information is transferred over is by cell penetrating peptides, which are basically molecular structures that end up changing the whole chemistry of a cell. They're different shaped molecules, they go into different shape holders that go around the membrane of a cell, and when a cell ends up dividing, that information is transferred over by the shapes that are actually left on the membrane, which are basically leaving themselves open for different types of peptides which relate to all the different activities that the body will do. Now let's take a old school ancient man, which is obviously a result of many different cells dividing over time, then reproducing, and then coming back to form another man who can go on and repeat the saga. Now at this point, maybe there were some situations that occurred that meant that the effects that alcohol actually have served as an evolutionary benefit. So in the case of certain predators, maybe certain humans were going off and doing certain drugs that gave them insights into creating weaponry or just different basically inventions that came up. But I see it as a possible situation that certain men who consumed forms of alcohol, which at that time, just what alcohol is, fermented fruit, the aggressiveness that comes with alcohol, the loss of inhibitions. This may have literally been one of the traits that got us through this more dangerous period in our history as men and women. This also relates to maybe this picture here. Now this is probably the last place I would like to have sex, but I know a few people who like to go out and get waved. They might be looking at that thinking, that don't even look that bad actually, that looks kind of joke. And that's another thing, the looseness that comes with it. Maybe the majority of humans are actually here off the kind of life tree of people who were conceived under the basis that actually alcohol made a situation which wasn't picture perfect, but was good enough just to have sex and essentially conceive and start the production of children. I see that as a actual possibility. But maybe the downside was the effect that it had on its cells itself. As I described before, alcohol is one of the drugs that when you get addicted to it, you can't go cold turkey without dying. And maybe there is something about the chemical that is alcohol that means that somehow it has a generational hold as well, so that there are parts of human genetics which feel attached to the alcohol chemical. But I would argue, like many of the other drugs, the next step is to start tweeing them off. But that is only my theory. But as it relates to mind altering drugs, where does alcohol sit on the scale in our societies now, as it relates to loss of inhibitions, aggressiveness, and sexuality as it relates to the family unit and our communities and societies? Now, I think the main flop about this article is that it's talking about how people essentially consume energy. And throughout the whole article, it did not mention once that different things will work for different people, which I just think is key. It's a key thing to say so that you're not, as a safety net to what it is that you're trying to describe, because ultimately it's always going to come down to that. So the way that they've provided the article is they're trying to say that every single person would benefit off a Mediterranean diet. Now, saying that, I used to live in the Mediterranean, and up until a couple of years ago, that was the healthiest that I'd ever been. But that was only till a couple of years ago. So the Mediterranean diet was the best thing that I had experienced physically until I changed my diet dramatically. And now I'm experiencing something that for me personally works a lot better. So again, I'm not knocking the Mediterranean diet as you've suggested it, but the idea that you're trying to say that everybody is going to benefit from it, you just need to, again, there's a difference between presenting a theory as an idea for people to think about and presenting a theory as science and trying to knock other people's science. There's just a big difference. So my last 2 points is that when people read articles like this, the first thing that somebody needs to ask themselves is, are you being as healthy as you can, as you think you can? Because we live in a culture where they'll give a child a treat knowing that that treat is bad for the child. So they'll give something that they know is bad for a child as a treat for the child. Those treats, as you then grow up, then become physical and emotional crutches for getting through certain aspects of life. That's the culture that we live in. So the question is are you living as healthy as you can by the research that you've done? Because there are people who would have read this article and taken what they wanted to take about alcohol, but then don't take about what it said about cigarettes. Because even in this article, it mentions that the non-smoking, athletic Mediterranean diet is the best diet. That's what they say. But there are people who will just take what they wanted to take about the alcohol and then ignore the rest of it. So I'm not knocking them for doing that, because essentially it's kind of how the article was laid out, so that it is possible to be able to do that. But the question is according to your own research, are you living as healthy as you can be? That's what I think is one of the main things, because we're always going to keep changing. But if you don't even have a personal agenda to be as healthy as possible, then what's the point in even engaging in conversations like this? The second thing is that my personal definition of detoxing, which may not be the official one, but is that you're getting rid of a lot of things in the body, not just possible toxins. For example, my friend, his whole life used to have severely dry skin. It just used to get real dry, real red. He was a white guy, so it was like proper red, proper dry, flaking off. It just used to happen. It just used to come up like that. When he was about 21, 22 years old, he found out that he was allergic to cheese, specifically. So it was probably dairy, but cheese is what brought him out with that. So once he'd found that out, he was basically able to get rid of those signs. So his body was trying to tell him through doing that. Once he figured that out, he no longer had that thing. Now, what a detox might have done is given him the chance to isolate things and say, okay, I've got rid of everything in my body. Let me try eating this, see what happens. Okay, nothing's happened. Let me try eating this, see what happens. Let's see what happens. Let me try eating this. Oh, look what's happened there. And I'm sure he didn't do it on purpose, but in terms of how I've defined detoxing, I'm sure it was that process that actually brought him to that conclusion, a point at which he could isolate, I ate this cheese and then that happened. So that's where I think one of the major benefits is to actually be able to find out about the truth about yourself. You can't rely on mainstream or alternative media to tell you about you. You have to go and you just have to go and do the experiments on yourself. That alchemaic sort of lifestyle of saying, okay, I'm a human, so I'm strong, I'm versatile. Do you know what I mean? My body is made to survive. Things aren't going to kill me instantly. And at the same time, I have a personal drive to try and be the greatest that I can be and the optimum that I can be. So on that level, I hope that you're healthy, and I hope you have a blessed day.